Hi everybody, David here from VIA Render. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. In this video, we want to look at something that's become a little bit topical as of late, and that is the setting up of a studio lighting setup within D5. Now, in this video, we're going to look at two ways you can go about doing this. How we can set up a basic studio lighting setup within Blender and then send that over to D5. And then we're also going to look at how you can do this using SketchUp if you do not have access to another 3D program. In addition, we look at how to go about setting up a simple enough lighting arrangement, and then we'll also talk about a number of variations on the lighting that you can use. There's a commonly kind of held belief that all lighting for a studio setup needs to be a 3-point setup, and we're going to go ahead and just look at some alternative ways of lighting your shots. This will be kind of similar to anyone who's had any experience using KeyShot to set up high-resolution product shots. All right, with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, everyone, so here we are in Blender. Now, if you're not aware, recently D5 did go ahead and release the officially supported D5 render converter for Blender, and I strongly encourage you to go ahead and check that out. We're going to use that in this video to send our content over to D5 instead of trying to export it and load it up as an FBX. All right, to begin, you'll also notice that I'm using Sumly here. Sumly was the scale measurement for, I think, maybe the previous version of SketchUp, and when I actually set up my initial Blender scene, I actually used her as a scale measurement. Especially as someone who was coming from SketchUp, I kind of missed having a person that I could use as a scale reference. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to hit G on my keyboard and just move her out of the way. I'm going to go to Add on the top left here. I'm going to go Mesh and a Plane. And there we go. It's a pretty basic default plane from Blender. I'm going to hit S on my keyboard just to scale this up a little bit. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is hit Tab on my keyboard, and I'm going to go into the edit mode. I'm going to go to the top left here and just click the edge. I'm going to left click on this edge, and I'm going to hit E on my keyboard to extrude this edge. And you can see I've effectively dragged off a new piece of geometry. I'm going to go ahead and on my keyboard, just hit the Z key, or Z if you're American, and go ahead and just lift up this plane. So this plane right here is going to be the backdrop of our actual studio lighting setup. All right, that looks pretty good. So with that edge selected, my next thing is to get out of the edit mode, and I'm just going to go back to object mode. I'm going to go to the right panel over here, and I'm going to go and click on the modifiers properties. And what I'm actually going to do here is, let's click on this, and I'm going to go to bevel. And you can see when I apply the bevel modifier, it does a really nice job of beveling this edge right here. Now it leaves the other ones alone, which is really, really nice. It's just going to bevel this interior edge. Now, I can adjust the amount that I want, and I can also adjust the segments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the amount quite a bit, and I'm going to take the segments up to about 8. That looks pretty nice. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to where it says apply all and just go ahead and apply that. Now, it looks good, but it obviously looks a little bit tessellated. The next thing I'm going to do is add another modifier, and this one is going to be a subdivision surface. We are basically going to smooth this out. Now, you'll see when I do that, this is not ideal. It's basically smoothing the outer edges as well. So if I go ahead and click on Advanced here, and what we can actually do is I'm going to ensure that I don't actually smooth the edges. So I'm going to go UV smooth, let's go none, and then boundary smooth, keep corners. There we go. That looks pretty nice. And in the viewport, I'm going to go ahead now and just start taking this up 5. Let's take it up to 6 or 7. I think 6 will be fine. And I'm going to apply all. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, Let's go up here to where it says D5. So right here you can see the D5 converter. I'm going to click on that. And in our next section, we're going to go ahead and export this to D5. Okay, before we send this to D5, it's worth taking a little bit of time to look at the D5 exporter or the D5 converter. Basically, the Blender to D5 converter is a good way to think of it. This is absolutely the same as the D5 converter that you've probably used in SketchUp or Rhino or 3D Studio Max. There are a few more little bits that we need to talk about, and I'm going to bounce back to Blender here. Okay. You'll see first we have the export to D5 button. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Actually, let me go ahead and save this first. You'll notice that if you don't save it, you won't be able to export. And you can actually see the D5 link, the sync button, is actually closed out. So let me go ahead and save my project really quick. Okay, now that we've gone ahead and saved, we can go ahead and load up an asset. I'm going to use an asset from iMesh. I did a video on those recently if you want to check that out. I'm going to go to seating and I'm going to go ahead and just bring in this chair right here. And I'm going to go ahead and use the cursor kind of targeting and I'm going to hit append and take a second. And there we go. It's going to load up my chair. Now, you'll notice it has come in and it's kind of actually going through the plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the top here, right here, and turn on Face Project and turn on Snapping. Hit G on my keyboard to grab my chair. And you can kind of see now that when we do that, it'll actually snap to the surface. Technically, what it's doing is snapping to the face. All right, with that done, I can go ahead and rotate my chair. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the gizmo to kind of bring this to the right a little bit. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open up the D5 converter again. And you can see now that we can go ahead and sync. So I'm going to hit that. And this is going to export to basically D5. It might take a second, but there we go. Depending on the complexity of your scene, this will happen, you know, it's going to depend really on how much geometry and how many materials and all that you have. Generally, I have found it to be quite responsive. I will, however, point out one issue. You can see here that we have options for material bake. Now, I'm really not entirely sure how your materials need to be set up for this to work. If I go ahead and go to, let's just go up here to, not quite UV edit, I'm going to go shading. And you can see this D5 asset has got a really complicated, well, I say complicated, it's a node system here, and you've got different materials going into different areas. Now, I've had really mixed success as it currently stands with D5 correctly baking my materials. And some of this is also dependent on UV editing and how well your UVs are actually laid out. So this is still kind of a work in progress for me. If I ever figure this out completely, or if there's some changes from the D5 material bake behind the scenes and they update the converter, I'll try and do a follow-up video. For now, I am working off the basis that geometry will transfer just fine. And you can see here, if I go to the modifiers tab for this object that I brought in, that, the subdivision model looks pretty good. I can go ahead and just hit apply all to this and just commit these changes. In other words, go ahead and commit this, basically the subdivision, and that's fine. And I do think that will transfer really well to D5. And you can see it looks pretty good. Some things like the metal material does seem to have translated pretty well, but the actual fabric material hasn't shown up. If I hit I on the keyboard, you can see it doesn't appear. So just keep this in mind. If you're using the Blender to D5 converter, complicated materials might not translate very well. I'll get back to you if we figure out what's going on. All in all, though, the overall geometry is still there. And what we can do is hit M on the keyboard, go ahead and pull up material. I'm going to go to Fabric, And I'm just going to assign something similar. Maybe try this beige linen. I'm going to go ahead and just drop that on. And if I zoom in, you know, that looks pretty comparable. The scaling's a little off, and I'm sure we could do some displacement magic. But by and large, I think that looks, I'm pretty happy with that. I do think we could tweak the scale, and let's put that down to 3. Yeah, that looks really, really nice. Okay, now we'll talk in a minute about how to set up the actual environment. In the next section, I want to talk about how we can do this in Blender. Okay, so here we are in SketchUp. And I'm going to try and do something similar to what we just did in Blender in SketchUp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's just draw a rectangle plane. This will eventually become our sort of backdrop, our studio backdrop. And I'm going to go ahead and just lift up. This will be the back. There we go. Yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. All right, and I'm just going to draw a number of lines from here to here. And let's go out a little bit more and go out a little bit more. And I'm just going to add some more. Okay, so we've got basically a very similar look to what happened in Blender when we use the sort of the bevel tool. Okay, now what I'm actually going to do, drag out a selection, right click, make it a group. And the only way I could get this to work properly was the use of the Sub-D plugin. So this is an extension that is available. It is available for purchase, and I think it's either $20 or $40. It is intended for using subdivision surface within SketchUp. So in other words, it's Sub-D modeling. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to toggle that on. And then I'm actually going to hit the blue button or the green button here to increase the subdivisions. Now, you can notice it's still coming in at a pretty abrupt angle. So let's go ahead and turn off that. And let's go ahead and just step back a little bit. And what I'm actually going to do is go ahead and grab this edge and use the move tool and just bring it up ever so slightly. And then I'm going to just go ahead and draw a handful more edges just to sort of recreate the effect that we had originally. So we want there to be a little bit of that curve, but it shouldn't be over the top. All right, let's select this again. Right click, make it a group, turn on Sub-D, and there we go. That's a lot smoother now. And let's go ahead and just increase the subdivisions. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. You can also go in here and turn off the subdivisions, make changes, and just kind of grab this, move this here a little bit. Maybe we want to actually just lift up this edge because we're kind of losing some of the flatness. And yeah, I think that looks okay. And then we can also hop out of the group and turn back on our Sub-D. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hit my D5 converter. I'll try and link out to the Sub-D plugin. I tried a bunch of different ways to get this to work using different plugins, like for example, the Soap Skin plugin, or using Fredo's Curve-A-Loft, and I honestly just couldn't really get a smooth enough curve. You could try maybe using the arc tool. So I'm just going to go ahead and just like place an arc here and maybe kind of rotate this around and then try and extend it. I couldn't really get these techniques to work. So, you could do something like that, and you could then maybe draw a line straight off here, draw another line up, but you can kind of see like the curve just isn't organic enough. It doesn't look like a proper backdrop. It's just simply a little too pronounced. So maybe some better SketchUp user could be able to tell me how to do that. I think this is pretty good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the D5 converter. I'm going to just do a Control S here, just save studio settings, yes, and go ahead and send this over to D5. When we go to D5, you can actually see that we can have a live link going from Blender and from SketchUp concurrently right at the same time, which is pretty sweet. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move these, just reposition these slightly. So I'm going to go ahead and just select everything in SketchUp, hit M on the keyboard, move it a little over to the left, And I'm actually going to scale this up just a little bit bigger. And again, just go ahead and update. Okay, so we've got kind of the two pretty close together. Now, one thing to note is you kind of want to pick and choose which way you're going to do this. I'm going to stay working with the Blender model just because I have access to that iMesh chair and I can make adjustments to that. But I just wanted you to be aware, this is how you can do a similar effect within SketchUp. Okay. In the next video, let's go ahead and talk about setting up our materials really quickly and then setting up our lighting and then showing off a number of different lighting setups that you might want to look at, something a little different from the basic three-point perspective. Now that we've got everything lined up, I've gone ahead and assigned some materials. We have a slightly kind of teal just seat that we're going to use for the cushion. I'm going to make that a little bit more blue, actually. And we've actually got a bronze material. This is just one of the default D5 materials. On the actual backdrop, I've gone ahead and made that a very light cream color. Now, one thing you can actually do is I'm going to go ahead here to Adobe Color. This is just a side note. If you're interested in looking at different color schemes, you can type in Adobe Color and you can come to this website. You can actually do quite a lot here, but what I've generally found to be very useful is to go look under the Trends tab, scroll down, and go click on, for example, Architecture, View More, and just see some of the current sort of trends in terms of design. So you can see the actual color scheme here. If you like the look of it, you can click on it. And if you're actually signed in to your Adobe account, you can go ahead and actually copy these. You can get the hex value. So these are these sort of six-digit codes here, and you could paste them right in. You can also go ahead and download it as a JPEG, and it's just a really valuable resource. I may do a longer video on this, but just be mindful, if you're stuck for a color scheme, this is a really good place to go. All right, the other thing we're going to do is go to Polyhaven. So there was a series of different Haven-esque websites recently around that have basically merged into one. And it's under the heading now of Polyhaven. And it is a free-ish. You can support them by basically purchasing their Blender asset add-on, or I believe you can go ahead and support them through Patreon as well. You can pay to support to basically remove the ads as well. Now, for our purposes, there's some fantastic stuff here. We're going to go to their HDRI section, and we're actually going to click on their Studio tab. And what we're looking at is something along the lines of these. And we're going to find something that kind of works. We want to avoid using, for example, an outdoor sky. Yes, it is still a HDRI image, but you can see the colors that you're going to get are going to be predominantly dominated by nature colors. So a lot of blues and a lot of greens. We want to give the impression that we're in a studio. So again, let's just go back to the Studio tab here. All right, I'm just going to kind of scroll down, just find something that I like the look of. These do download pretty quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this Small Studio 01. We are going to go ahead and I'm going to download this in 8K. You can go up to 16K. You want to make sure that you actually change this to HDRI. You can see the download size is pretty large, but I'm going to go ahead. We should get away with an 8K, no problem. Let's go ahead and click download. And what we'll actually do then is we're going to load this up into D5. All right. To do that, we'll just go to the environment. We're going to make sure we're set to the HDRI. And what you can do is use this drop-down menu here and go customize HDRI, or go ahead and just load up your own HDRIs. Okay, you can see the HDRI has loaded right up here. Now, one thing to be mindful of, D5 displays your 8K or 16K or 4K or 6K HDRI as a 2K in the viewport. So it's going to look kind of blurry, not ideal, but do note that it will render at a higher resolution. All right, that looks pretty nice. I'm going to make sure that we have no sun turned on, and I'm going to rotate this just a little bit, just get a little bit more light falling into the scene. And I think the lighting is overall pretty good. I'm going to crank this up just a little bit. That looks pretty nice. All right, and I'm going to leave the color temperature as neutral. Now we're going to set up a simple 3-point lighting system, and then we're going to talk about how we can go about trying different lighting systems as well. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and assemble our basic lighting system. We're going to start with a 3-point lighting system, and then we'll look at some other interesting variations that we can work on. For the first one, I'm going to just move my camera back just a little bit. I'm going to go to my lights up here. I'm going to grab a rectangle light, and I'm going to just place that flat on the ground. Now, I'm going to go ahead and spin my camera here. I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees. Just bring it right up. Yeah, looks good. And then I'm going to go ahead and lift this up. I don't want it perfectly horizontally flush with the object. I'm going to actually take it up just a little bit more. And now I'm going to rotate it. So you can see that bulk of that light is coming right over here. Also, you're just going to move this back just a little bit. And I'm sure there's probably is a perfect measurement and value for this. I'm just going to reposition this as I see. All right, that looks good. And I think I need to just rotate it a little bit more on the Y now. I think, yeah, let's just tilt this. Yeah, I think that will work. Okay, looking at it from here, not too bad. You can see we're getting quite a lot of light coming in. That looks really, really nice. All right, the intensity, I'm going to just drop the intensity. Let's see, can we get away with this at 20? Yeah, I think that works just fine. Okay, that is going to act as our key light. I'm just going to tweak this a little bit. I just want to get it perfectly flush. And I think that's going to be the majority of the actual light in the scene will come from this light. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene up here on the left. I'm going to just call it scene 1. That looks good. Now, what we need is a fill light to go along with that. So I'm going to go ahead and you can go up here, do rectangular light, or just hit 4. Or what you can do is just go ahead and select your current light, holding down Shift, drag out a duplicate. And again, I'm going to rotate this one so the light is falling more on our actual chair. I'm going to go ahead and pull this one back ever so slightly and just rotate it a little bit more. And I'm going to drop the intensity on this one down to about 10. Now we can also tweak the attenuation radius on both of these. So on my main light, I'm going to go ahead and just take that up just a little bit. You can see drop it to 0, we get nothing, and there we go. Kind of want this to be almost infinite light going from left to right. And then the attenuation radius on the other one was set to 500. I'm going to go ahead and just push this up just a little bit. There we go. And maybe put this up to about 15. Generally, the rim light, the second light, the fill light is supposed to be about half the strength. Okay, that looks really, really nice. Last light we're going to add is going to be basically another rectangle light, which will actually sit behind our model. All right, let's go ahead and hit F4. Okay, and rotate this. Ooh, yeah, that looks pretty good. I like the look of that. And I'm going to go ahead and just lift this up a little bit. This is going to give you a highlight. For those of you who've ever used ZBrush, particularly ZBrush for character or creature sculpting, you'll probably be familiar with this lighting setup, especially because your passes will be effectively rendered out of ZBrush, and then you'll basically composite them in Photoshop. So you've probably come across this system before. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just make this one a blue color. So we can go ahead and grab the temperature, just make that more blue. And I might drop the size of this. They're coming in about 1,000. I'm going to put this to about 300 and 300 on that. That might be a little too small, but I am getting that nice light. You can see the rim light is working. Let's go ahead and put it back to 5. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think all in all, that will work pretty nicely. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this light has also got a bit of an orange glow. And the default for this one, I'm actually going to take the intensity up to about 25. There we go. Okay, that's looking pretty nice all in all. I'd be kind of pretty happy with this actually. Okay, we could probably tweak some of these settings a little bit more, but looking at the model that we actually have, I'm pretty happy with how light is actually working on it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my stored scene, and I think that'll work quite nicely. Again, we haven't fiddled with the camera too much or done anything like that yet, so let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I made a few little tweaks there just in the break. Just tweaking the rotation of my background and the strength of the skylight. But for the most part, everything is as we left it. I did go ahead and pull the rim light forward just a little bit. It was actually going behind the scenery, kind of casting an odd shadow that I couldn't identify. So this is how our shot is looking right now. I'm going to go to the camera mode. And what I've actually done is set up a custom camera. So I really like the kind of 4:3 ratio, but you'll notice that it does get a little squat looking. And so if we want to do a custom one, we can keep this concept of basically 4:3 and we can adjust our own, but I want it to be kind of the reverse. Very similar to like the 5.5, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to type in, let's do 5,000 on the height. And by default, D5 actually has this linking, this custom linking enabled. So for example, if I type in 5,000, by default, it'll adjust the width as well. But you can actually disable that by just turning that off. And I'm going to type in 4,000 here. Do be mindful though, that this is still going to be a 5,000 by 4,000 pixel image. So it's, it might take a little bit of time. You can also go up here to the fly option and go ahead and just slow down your camera movement to help you position. I'm going to go up here to scene 1 and hit refresh. And I think, beyond making a few tweaks here, potentially to the effects tab, for example, adjusting the auto exposure and adjusting the highlight, I think this is pretty good. The exposure itself is probably a little too bright, but I think, you could definitely go in here and just adjust that. Now, so that's a basic lighting setup. And please note, there is no like ultra true kind of final lighting setup. You're really going to want to do this individually for everything. These concepts like 3-point perspective or 3-point lighting, they're guidelines and you still got to go in and make some changes. All right, now with that one done, let's go ahead and I'm going to group these and hide them. And we look at another potential lighting setup that you may want to look at. So the next lighting technique resembles a little bit like this. And go ahead and turn this on. So this is, I believe, sometimes referred to as the Rembrandt, and sort of in reference to the painter. You'll notice that we've got areas of very pronounced light and areas of dark. And the key here is to use the areas of light to really grab your viewer's attention. How we do this in D5 is relatively basic. Under the Environment tab, I have gone ahead and just spun my HDRI. I've turned off the background, so it's not actually lighting anything back here. You can see there's no color appearing. That's fine. And I put the actual light down to an incredibly low value. After that, what we do is we go ahead and we drop in a rectangular light, and this is going to act like basically our key light. And you can see here, we've gone ahead and if I click on the light, where's my little light gun? Go ahead and click on the light here. We can actually take a look at some of the sort of settings for this. Let me move that back. There we go. And you can see the intensity is actually quite low. The positioning, if I look down on my light, or if you actually want it, we can always go up here to display and where we go? I'm sorry, camera, and go to top, and you can see there we go. So our light is basically just at a sort of 45-degree angle, and it's just shooting light towards our actual object. Now, if we go back to our stored camera here, Rembrandt, you can kind of see you can get quite a strong effect just by positioning this light and moving it either closer or further from your object. Either way, your aim is towards a dramatic shadow. You can adjust this by messing with the attenuation radius. You could probably also do this effect using just a single point light or omni light, but I do like the effect that the rectangular lights have. You can also go ahead and select this and again, just rotate it down for maximum impact. And if it's too strong, just go ahead and adjust the intensity. And you can see if we go back to our camera mode, this looks pretty nice, especially if we were to go into the environment tab again. Actually, let's go into the effects tab and adjust things like the highlight and the shadow. And you can kind of see just how dramatic you can make this by turning off the auto exposure as well. You can go in and again, manually customize this. And you can get some really lovely lights and lovely darks on that, especially by cranking up the shadow a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good and relatively easy to set this one up. Pretty much just one light and some environment tweaking. So the next approach we want to look at is referred to as the split and fill. If I zoom back here a little bit, you can see now we've got two lights. The one on the right is very similar to our Rembrandt light, but we have increased the size, lifted it up a little bit, and moved it back. So it's set to about an intensity of 15 and size of about 2000. Okay, what we're going to do here now is just move this one a little closer. And what I'm really looking at is the attenuation radius. You want to get it where we have kind of a nice fall off somewhere across the midline. So I'm going to settle on about there. All right, that looks good. Over here on the left, we have another area light. This is set to the default. I think it's about 1000 by 1000. And I'm going to go ahead and just move that just about there. You can see it's acting like a rim light. And I'm going to adjust the attenuation radius. I want a little bit of falling over across our object. I'm going to move this just a little bit closer. Yeah, I think that looks good. And again, this should almost be kind of just flush. All right, let's see how that looks. I think that looks nice. We're getting some nice shadows. We're getting some fall off. And I think we can go ahead and make the intensity of the original light a little brighter. Maybe put it up to about 25. There we go. Let's take a look at that. And we're going to go into, again, our rendered mode and just see how that's working. Now, I think that looks pretty good. We've got the exposure. Again, that's something that we'll want to manually tweak. But I think, all in all, that looks pretty nice. We're getting light coming in from both sides. We're getting a kind of dramatic effect. I think, all in all, that looks pretty good. And that's a pretty easy setup to do. You do get some nice specularity, and you get this kind of sort of edged or rim light over here. And most of the light is coming from the right. I think that's pretty nice looking. All right, let's do one more lighting setup. So the last type of lighting I want to talk about using artificial lights, not entirely sure of the name of this one, but it gives a very nice result to my mind. If we actually go behind our model, what we actually have is 2 point lights set up, one on either side of the actual model. Now, these are set up with a pretty low sort of intensity and a pretty small attenuation radius. So they exist really just to lighten up that background area just a little bit and give a slight rim light effect. And then the chief light is actually going to come from this one here. This is closer to the model, acting as our sort of key, or I think it would be, yeah, key light. And I'm going to go ahead and just position this where I think it needs to go. And most of the light is actually going to come from this. All right, let me go ahead and just replace that. So let me spin this. All right, yeah, looks good. Lift this up. And then this is going to be what's going to really determine a look of a lot of the feel of our actual shot. And I think that looks pretty nice. I'm going to just bring that back, bring it up, and again, maybe just tilt it down a little bit. Drop the intensity down to about 20. We still want some shadows in the shot. You really do want that. And I'm going to go back to, yeah, my camera mode. Again, we haven't adjusted much, so I'm just going to tweak the exposure just a little bit, just bring that down, and we can tweak the highlights and tweak some of the shadows if we want for a more dramatic shot. I think, let me go ahead and just put my speed back to 1. Yeah, I think all in all, you can get some really nice looks. I'm going to do one more briefly, and I'm going to see, can we light the scene using nothing but the HDRI? In this last section, I just want to see, is it possible to light up an interior shot using just the HDRI? This is a little bit separate to the lighting setups that we've looked at previously, and this is actually a different scene entirely. But I am just wondering if we can go ahead and light this using just the HDRI. So you can see in my default scene, I actually have a number of lights activated. I'm going to turn them off completely. And we just forget about this original shot. I'm using the Geo and Sky, and I'm going to go ahead and change that to the HDRI. And I've loaded up this small studio. This is slightly different to the one that we've used for our previous lighting setup. It is from Polyhaven as well, but it is set to 16K, and I've done nothing to it, just loaded it up. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and just take all my lights over here on the right. I'm going to group them and just hide them away. And let's just go back then to our actual scene. Okay, here we are. Let's see what we can do. You can see by default, it's obviously just a little too bright. Let us look at the exposure. I'm going to put this to 0. Okay, that's just the default exposure. And I'm going to make sure on my camera, I've got a little bit of depth of field. I'm going to turn that off just while we work. All right. Everything is set to default. I'm just going to rotate, and I'm going to just spin this and see, can we get kind of a dramatic looking lighting setup. Yeah, I kind of actually like where the light is hitting right there on our product. I think that looks pretty good. Just putting it back to 0. I am going to go ahead and turn on the sun, and you can kind of see that's kind of blown things out just a little bit. Let's see. I suspect, yeah, I'm going to turn off bloom and lens flare. That's kind of throwing things off a little bit. And I'm just going to look at this really quickly. You are getting quite a lot of light in the scene. I do think that works quite well. I don't know. We still need to get, I think that looks pretty good. We're getting a nice highlight across here, and I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and make the HDRI a little bit more blue. And the color temperature of the sun, I'm going to actually make it a little bit more orange. I think that looks good. The sunlight intensity, I think I'm going to go ahead and just leave this about 1. And the sun disk radius, I'm actually going to minimize it. I want sharper shadows. The overall light value, I'm going to take that down just a little bit. I don't want, kind of don't really want this on the background. That's fine. And the skylight itself, yeah, I think about here is good. If I turn off the sun, there we go. That will show you our exact. So that's the HDRI. So really, yeah, a lot of the light there is actually coming from the additional sun. Otherwise, we're not really getting a huge amount of visual information from the HDRI. So yeah, I mean, is it possible? Yeah, I mean, you can definitely light your scene, but most of the light here is coming from the sun. I'm not really getting the impression that the actual HDRI is really doing a huge amount to light this up. Even positioned straight on, I don't really get the impression. Most of the highlight is really, let's pull the camera back, is really just coming from that artificial sun. And I think, this is interesting to me. I kind of thought we'd actually get a very different response. When you take off the sun, you can see that the HDRI looks extremely flat. Even if we go in here and we tweak the exposure, that should be a studio HDRI. I would have thought that would be lighting up kind of a lot more, even with the highlight. Let's try a different HDRI. Let's just try something. Let's try this frozen lake. So you can see it's giving this bluish tint. And let's go ahead and, again, we'll turn off that sun. The skylight is set to full. It's kind of interesting to me. It is providing light. You can definitely see that. Unless I've got something set up incorrectly, yeah, I don't think I would actually do this. I don't think you could really go ahead and light using just the HDRI. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't really think so. I think you're still going to go ahead and get the best results. If I put this back to, let's just load up that custom one again, just really quickly. And it is, again, this is a 16K HDRI. It's not looking wonderful. Without actually using the sun and without then maybe turning on actual lights in your scene, I'm going to go back to my group here and turn these ones on. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me. Okay, at first glance, don't light your scene with just the HDRI. In fact, honestly, using maybe even the Geo and Sky with a mixture of these lights will actually get you a little bit further. That looks kind of a lot cooler to my mind than really just the default HDRI. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Hopefully, this has been valuable. You've learned a couple of different alternatives to just the basic 3-point perspective, and you've learned how to set up the studio background. And finally, you've learned don't light a scene using just the HDRI. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.